The rain didn't stop that evening. Thick drops fell like tiny stones from the dark sky, soaking the muddy ground outside the small human colony on planet Varela. Jaden sat alone in his tent, reading an old book under a weak light. The storm made the tent walls shake softly, and he could hear distant thunder rumble. But something else caught his attention. It was a soft tapping sound, not from the rain, but like feet slapping wet ground. Slowly getting closer, Jaden unzipped the tent door and peeked out. Through the gray sheets of rain, he saw a figure sitting on the cold earth near a broken fence. It wasn't a human. He could tell right away. The figure had long silver hair, thin limbs, and glowing blue eyes that stared blankly ahead. She wore a thin, torn cloak, and her hands were wrapped tightly around her knees. She was shaking badly, as if she had been there for hours, maybe all day. Jaden's heart pulled him forward. He grabbed a spare thermal blanket and walked toward her, boots sinking into the mud with every step. As he got closer, he saw that her skin had a light purple tone, and strange lines glowed softly along her arms. She looked up at him slowly, blinking against the rain, her lips too cold to speak. Without thinking, Jaden wrapped the blanket around her and whispered, "You'll freeze out here." She didn't answer. She didn't move. She just stared at him like she was trying to understand why he was helping her. Jaden pointed to his tent. "Come with me. You can stay dry and warm." She hesitated, eyes narrowing as if confused by his kindness. Then she nodded once and stood up, her legs weak and trembling. He helped her walk, one step at a time, until they reached the tent. Inside, the warm air from his small heater greeted them, and the girl let out a shaky breath like it was her first sign of relief. Jaden gave her a towel and offered some protein biscuits. She didn't touch them. Instead, she sat in the corner, her eyes scanning the tent's walls like they were alive. Jaden sat across from her, trying not to stare. He had met many alien travelers, but none like her. She had no bag, no ID tag, and no translator chip in her neck. She was truly alone. After a long silence, she finally spoke, her voice soft and strange. "Are you sure I can stay here tonight?" Jaden nodded. Of course no one should sleep out in that storm. Her eyes glowed a little brighter, and her voice dropped lower. "I cannot promise you will survive the night." Jaden blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" But she didn't answer. She just sat still, pulling the blanket tighter around her thin body, staring at the floor. Jaden tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. Maybe she was just scared or confused. After all, who knows what she had gone through? Before coming here, he turned off the reading lamp and laid down, using his jacket as a pillow. The rain outside grew louder, almost angry, as the wind shook the tent. Jaden tried to sleep, but something felt wrong. The air inside the tent was too still, too heavy. He opened his eyes and noticed something strange. Faint glowing lines were slowly appearing on the inner walls of the tent. They weren't there before. They moved like writing symbols. He didn't understand. He sat up, and when he looked toward the girl, she was no longer wrapped in the blanket. She was sitting cross-legged now, eyes closed, her fingers moving in the air as if drawing invisible shapes. The glowing symbols followed her hands, lighting up the fabric of the tent like silent fireflies. Jaden whispered, "Hey, what are you doing?" The girl opened her eyes slowly, and they were brighter now, almost white. She tilted her head. "They will come if I don't hide." Jaden's heart pounded. "Who will come?" But she didn't reply. The tent grew darker, and the small heater flickered, as if something outside had drained its power for just a second. Then silence, complete silence. Even the rain stopped. Jaden looked outside. No drops, no wind, just fog and stillness. He turned back and found her staring at him again, eyes locked to his, voice like a whisper carried by the wind. "You invited me in, and now they know your name too." Jaden felt a chill run down his spine. He had only meant to help a girl in the rain. But maybe this night wasn't going to be just about shelter and warmth. Maybe this night had just begun in a way he couldn't understand. Jaden didn't know how long he had been asleep. One moment his eyes were closed, the next, a soft, humming sound filled the air around him. It wasn't from the wind or the heater. It was something deeper, something that seemed to crawl under his skin and whisper inside his skull. He sat up quickly, breath short, and looked around the tent. The alien girl was awake too, sitting perfectly still. Her hands resting on her knees, her eyes staring at nothing. The glowing marks from earlier were back, but now they moved slowly, like they were alive. Lines slid across the tent walls like rivers of light, forming symbols and shapes Jaden didn't understand. They shifted constantly, making no sound, yet Jaden could somehow hear them. It was like the shapes themselves were speaking, just not in words. Jaden whispered, "What is that?" The girl didn't turn, didn't blink. She only said one word, "Echoes." Jaden's chest felt tight, like the air was too thick to breathe. The humming grew louder, then stopped all at once, leaving a painful silence behind. And then he heard voices. They didn't come from the girl or from outside. They came from the walls of the tent, soft broken voices, like old memories being replayed. Some were crying, some were laughing, others whispering his name, his full name, even though he had never told it to her. He crawled backward until his back hit the fabric behind him. His voice shook. "What's going on? What are you doing to me?" The girl finally looked at him, her face calm, her expression unreadable. "I warned you," she said softly, "but you still invited me in." Jaden felt something cold move along his neck, like fingers of air. He turned but saw nothing, still. The voices didn't stop. Now they were louder, faster, like 100 people talking at once from inside his head. He grabbed his ears, trying to shut them out, but the sound was already inside. The symbols glowed brighter, faster, and his own name echoed again and again. He screamed, "Stop!" And just like that, everything went silent again. No humming, no glowing, just darkness. Jaden blinked, heart pounding, as his eyes adjusted to the dim light. The tent looked normal again. The heater buzzed quietly, and the girl sat where she had before. She looked tired, like something had been taken from her. "You touched the marks," she whispered. "They remembered you." Jaden didn't understand, but he didn't ask again. Instead, he moved to the corner of the tent, farthest from her. His skin itched, and his mind felt full, like something else had entered it. Every time he blinked, he saw flashes, images of strange buildings, dark skies, and faces he didn't know. He couldn't tell if they were dreams or memories, or someone else's thoughts leaking into his. The girl watched him silently, her eyes no longer glowing. Jaden stared back, anger building inside him. "What are you?" She paused for a long time, then answered in a voice that was barely hers. "I am what's left." He didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every sound made him flinch. Every shadow looked like it was moving. The air inside the tent felt wrong, like it didn't belong to this world anymore. But the girl didn't move, didn't speak again. She just waited, as if something else was still coming. When the first light of morning touched the tent, Jaden felt a wave of relief. He unzipped the flap and looked outside. The storm had passed, and the world was quiet. Wet trees sparkled under the sunlight, and birds chirped somewhere far away. For a moment, it all felt normal again. But when he turned back inside, his heart sank. The girl was gone. No sound, no footprints, no sign of her leaving. Only one thing remained: her blanket, folded neatly on the floor, and under it, drawn faintly in the dirt, was a single glowing symbol. Jaden didn't recognize it, but the moment he saw it, his ears rang with the sound of the voices again. Not loud, just a whisper this time. His name, spoken once, slow and clear, that night, had been strange, but now he realized something worse. It wasn't over. Jaden didn't remember falling asleep, but when he opened his eyes, he was no longer in his tent. He stood barefoot on strange ground that wasn't dirt, grass, or sand. It was smooth, black stone, cold beneath his feet. Above him, the sky burned, with purple clouds moving in slow spirals across the stars. There were towers in the distance, tall and sharp like teeth, and between them moved shapes tall, silent, watching him. He turned quickly, trying to make sense of it, but the air was too still, too heavy. He wasn't dreaming. Or if he was, it felt far too real. His heartbeat echoed in his ears, and every breath felt like he was breathing in smoke. And then he saw her. The alien girl from the night before stood at the center of a wide circle, her silver hair floating. Even though there was no wind, she looked different now, older, taller, and her eyes weren't just glowing. They were shining like stars. Symbols spun around her in the air, forming rings of light and darkness. Jaden took a step toward her, but the stone cracked beneath his foot. She looked at him and spoke without moving her lips. "You entered the memory path. You shouldn't be here." Jaden tried to speak, but his voice came out as a whisper. "What is this place?" Her expression didn't change, but her voice returned, louder this time, inside his head. "This is a piece of what I lost. A world that was taken from me, now buried under time." The towers behind her pulsed once, and Jaden suddenly saw flashes, war, fire, broken cities, people screaming in silence. He stepped back, dizzy, as pain shot through his head like knives of light. "No," she said sharply, and the images stopped. "You are not built for truth, only pieces." Jaden looked down and saw the ground beneath him ripple like water. His own reflection appeared, but it was not his face, it was someone else's. Or something else's. A strange creature with his eyes and someone else's mouth. Someone ancient. He staggered back, breath caught in his throat. "I want to wake up," he gasped. "I don't want this." The girl stepped forward now, closer. "You can't wake up yet. You opened the door." Jaden's hands began to glow faintly, and when he looked at them, they had symbols across his skin again, just like in the tent, but now they were burning slowly, marking him. The girl raised her hand and touched his forehead. A light flashed, and everything changed again. He was in a forest now, but it wasn't the one near his colony. It was darker, twisted, with trees shaped like claws and leaves that whispered. He ran, heart pounding, unsure of what he was running from. Every shadow looked alive, and the wind carried voices, not words, just sounds, echoes, screams, laughter, and one familiar whisper. "Jaden." He tripped over a root and hit the ground hard. The pain sharp and sudden, but when he opened his eyes again, he was in his tent, back where he started, lying on his back, gasping for air. The morning light still glowed through the tent walls, but something was off. The world didn't feel normal anymore. He wasn't sure if he had dreamed it, or if he had been taken somewhere real. His hands still had the glowing marks, but they were fading slowly. He touched his forehead where she had placed her hand, and it still tingled. He looked around still. Alone, but he knew she had been there, or part of her still was. Jaden stepped outside and looked at the sky. It looked normal blue, soft clouds drifting slowly, birds flying by. But when he looked at the ground near the tent, his breath caught. There were footprints in the mud, not his and not hers, large, wide, and deep, like something heavy had walked around the tent in circles. Jaden followed the prints, each one pressing deep into the earth. They led a few meters into the forest, and then simply stopped. No turning, no fading, just vanished. He turned back quickly and hurried to the tent, heart racing again, he thought. The worst was over, but now he was sure. It was only beginning. Inside the tent, something had been left for him. A small, folded piece of black cloth that shimmered with shifting light. He picked it up carefully, and inside was a single phrase written in those strange alien symbols. But this time, he could read it. Somehow he could understand it clearly. It said, "Tonight, the door opens again." Jaden didn't know what it meant, but he knew he wouldn't sleep easily tonight. The trees were speaking again. Jaden didn't hear words, not like normal voices, but every time the wind passed through the leaves he could feel it, like someone whispering memories through the air. He stood still in the middle of the forest, breathing slowly, trying to listen. The air smelled different: wet soil, glowing moss, and something older. Something ancient that didn't belong to his world. Star walked ahead of him, barefoot, her steps quiet but certain. She seemed to understand the forest, like it was guiding her. Jaden wasn't sure where they were going, but he followed her without asking. After everything he had seen, he didn't need reasons anymore. He just knew he had to stay close. They walked past twisted trees with roots like fingers. Strange symbols had begun to grow on their bark. Glowing faintly like fireflies, Star touched one of the symbols, and it blinked once like it was alive. Then she turned to Jaden and said, "They remember you too now." He didn't ask who they were. Instead, he whispered, "Why are we here?" Star didn't answer, not with words. She led him deeper until they reached a place where the trees grew in a perfect circle. In the middle was a stone, covered in moss and light. Jaden stepped closer and froze. His name was carved into the stone, glowing like the others, but it wasn't written in human letters. It was in her language, the one he had never spoken, yet somehow he understood it. "This isn't possible," he said, backing away. Star looked at him with sad eyes. "You're not the first, Jaden." He stared at her. Waiting, heart pounding, she walked slowly to the stone and placed her hand on it. A hum filled the air, deep, low, and alive. The ground trembled slightly, and the light around them grew stronger. Trees began to lean inward as if bowing, and then the whispers became louder. Jaden heard parts of words, now fragments of a language older than time. A woman crying, a child calling for help, metal breaking, and wind screaming through fire. It overwhelmed him. He fell to one knee. Holding his head, Star rushed to him and placed her hands on his shoulders. "It's too soon," she whispered. "You weren't ready." Jaden looked up at her, confused, scared, angry. "What is this place?" He shouted, "Why does it know me?" Star closed her eyes. "Because it's part of you." Jaden shook his head, backing away. "I'm just a guy with a tent in the woods." She opened her eyes, glowing brighter now. "You were chosen long before that." Suddenly, the light vanished. The trees went still. The stone stopped glowing. Only silence remained. Jaden breathed heavily, sweat dripping from his face. The forest had gone quiet, but not empty. Something had awakened, and it was watching. He could feel it. They left the stone circle in silence. Star didn't speak again until they reached a cliff overlooking a wide valley. Below them, ancient ruins rested beneath a thick fog. Sharp towers poked through the mist like the bones of a long-dead beast. Jaden stared at them. "What is that place?" Star whispered, "Home." Jaden turned to her, eyes wide. "You came from down there?" She nodded slowly. "A long time ago." He looked back at the ruins, the wind brushing his face like cold fingers. "I thought your people lived in ships or cities," he said. Star's voice was soft. "We used to before we buried ourselves here." Jaden frowned. "Why bury it?" "Because we were ashamed," she said, looking away. "Because we wanted to forget what we did." Jaden didn't ask more. He could feel it. This place had secrets that were alive, and they didn't want to stay buried much longer. He sat down beside her, watching the fog move slowly across the ruins. Something deep inside him whispered again, and this time it sounded like his own voice. Jason opened his eyes and didn't know where he was. Everything around him pulsed with soft blue light. The air felt heavy, like he was underwater but still breathing. He looked down at his hands, which glowed faintly, just like Kari's skin. Then he saw her, floating above the stone floor, her eyes closed, her body wrapped in light. He remembered stepping forward in the ancient chamber. He had touched the wall, and the machine had responded, but what happened next, he couldn't explain. Was this a dream, or something else? Kari suddenly opened her eyes in the glowing space and whispered, "You weren't supposed to see this yet." Jason stepped closer, unsure if she was real or just a memory. "Where are we?" he asked. Kari looked around slowly. A memory, but also a message. Suddenly, the walls around them shifted, turning into a star map. Bright dots moved in circles, some crashing, others fading out. She pointed to a large red light at the center, pulsing slowly. "That is the origin," she said. Where it all began, Jason didn't understand. But he kept listening. Kari continued, I was created near there, not born. Built, chosen. Jason's eyes widened. You're not alive? I am, she said quickly. But not the way you are. She stepped forward and placed a hand on his chest. You feel the world with your body, she said. I feel it with what I carry inside. Jason swallowed hard. Why did they chase you? Because I took something, she said. Something they couldn't understand. The star map vanished, and suddenly they stood in a room filled with alien figures. They wore armor and had no faces, just masks glowing with red light. They pointed at Kari, shouting words Jason didn't know. Then he saw her grab something small and shining a piece of the same stone now in Jason's backpack. They called it a fragment, Kari said. But I called it hope. The figures rushed at her, and the memories shattered like glass. Jason fell backward into darkness, and then opened his eyes in the real chamber again. He gasped and sat up, heart racing. Kari was beside him, breathing hard, her hands glowing. You touched too deep, she said, voice shaking. Jason rubbed his head. You said I wasn't supposed to see it yet. She looked away. It's too late now. The chamber lights faded as the machine in the center grew quiet. Jason stood and looked at it, still pulsing faintly then, for the first time. It spoke to him directly. You carry her memory, it said, and now her path. Jason stepped back. What does that mean? Kari whispered, it means they will come for you too. A deep rumble shook the walls, dust falling from the ceiling. Jason reached for his pack and helped Kari to her feet. They ran out of the chamber as another tremor shook the ground. Outside, the forest was darker than before, like the trees were closing in. Jason saw shapes moving between the trunks, fast, silent, searching. Kari pointed toward the river in the distance. That way, hurry. They ran together, breath tight, feet sliding on wet ground. Behind them, one of the seekers let out a high-pitched sound. Jason turned and saw a red light scanning the ground they had just left. As they reached the river's edge, Kari pulled something from her pouch, a small cube that began to glow. She threw it into the water, and a wide bridge of energy formed across. Jason hesitated, then grabbed her hand and ran across it, just before the light faded behind them. He looked back. One of the seekers stood at the river's edge. Unable to cross, they kept running until the trees began to thin. The stars above them shone brightly now. Jason finally stopped to breathe, his chest burning. Kari collapsed beside him, her face pale, her glow flickering. Jason placed a hand on her shoulder. What now? She looked up at him, exhausted. Now we find the others, Jason frowned. There are more like you. She nodded weakly. Not many, but if even one still remembers, we might survive. Jason looked up at the stars again. He had come into these woods for silence and peace. Now he was running from machines, haunted by visions, and connected to something ancient. And worst of all, somehow, it felt right. Like he was meant to be here, like the weirdest night of his life wasn't over yet. The first scream didn't come from Kari. It came from the forest itself. The sound echoed like wind tearing through a broken pipe. Long and angry, Jason dropped low and covered Kari with his body. Branches above them twisted unnaturally, and the stars blinked out like someone had turned off the sky. Something had awakened, something that didn't want them moving forward. Kari's body shook violently, her skin glowing too bright, too fast. Jason touched her arm and felt a jolt run through him like lightning. He pulled back, gasping, his hands numb. Kari, he whispered, you're burning up. She didn't answer. Her eyes locked shut, her teeth clenched. The marks on her arms pulsed like they were alive. Jason looked around, searching for anything, water, cover, safety. But the forest had turned unfamiliar. Trees stood taller, older, bending toward them like curious giants. Then came the lights. Dozens of white beams scanned the forest floor, sweeping in slow lines. From above, the seekers had found them again, but this time They weren't alone. Heavy footsteps pounded the earth. Not mechanical, but real. Armor clanked. And strange voices shouted commands in a language Jason didn't know. He saw them through the trees, tall figures in dull green armor. Faces hidden behind black masks, aliens, but not like Kari. These moved with anger, with purpose, soldiers. Jason dragged Kari behind a thick root and crouched down. She was still trembling, her glow now flickering like a dying fire. He pressed her close, trying to keep her still. Then one of the soldiers raised a hand. The rest stopped, silent, waiting. The leader stepped forward and pointed toward Jason's hiding spot. He knew they'd seen them. He stood slowly, hands up, trying not to seem like a threat. "Please," he shouted. "She's sick, she needs help." The soldiers didn't respond. Instead, the leader stepped forward, lifted a small device, and pressed a button. A red light scanned Jason from head to toe. Then the soldier flinched and looked back at his squad. Jason heard one word repeated in their strange tongue: "Carrier." 2 soldiers rushed forward and grabbed him roughly. He tried to resist, but one hit him hard in the stomach, knocking the breath out of him. They pinned him to the ground, one holding each arm. He shouted Kari's name. She still hadn't moved, her body glowing faintly now. The leader walked up to her and kneeled. He reached toward her neck, where a small circular mark glowed brightly. But before he could touch her, Kari opened her eyes. They were no longer purple. They burned white like twin stars. The ground shook violently, knocking the soldiers back. Jason rolled away just before the earth cracked between them. A wave of energy burst out from Kari's body, sending light through every tree. The soldiers screamed, covering their masks with both hands. The seekers overhead malfunctioned, spinning wildly before dropping from the sky like broken toys. Kari rose slowly, her feet not touching the ground anymore. The symbols on her skin now danced freely, glowing brighter than ever. The leader aimed a weapon at her chest, but before he could fire, it melted in his hands. She spoke, her voice layered with echoes. "I was made to listen, not obey." Jason stood, still breathless, watching as every soldier dropped their weapons and fell to their knees, not in surrender, but in fear. Kari turned to Jason and held out her hand. He didn't hesitate. Their fingers touched, and everything went silent, all around them. The forest returned to stillness, the stars flickered back on, and the strange tension in the air disappeared. Kari's body lowered gently to the ground, her eyes closing again. Jason caught her as she collapsed. Barely breathing, he held her close, heart pounding. The soldiers slowly backed away, saying nothing. Whatever they came to do, they were no longer sure of it. One of them looked at Jason and said, in broken English, "She changed the code." Then they vanished into the trees, leaving behind nothing but broken machines and deep silence. Jason looked down at Kari, her light now barely a flicker. "I've got you," he whispered. "Just stay with me." He didn't know what she had become, or what he had just witnessed, but one thing was certain: nothing in the universe would take her from him now. The smoke was thick, but Jason kept moving through it like he could see something no one else could. Each step sent sparks across the broken stone floor. Each breath pulled more light into his veins. The staff in his hand no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like part of him. Kari ran beside him, her glow dim now, her strength clearly fading. She had given everything to help him get this far, and Jason could see it in the way she stumbled. Still, she didn't fall. "Not once," she whispered. "You're the last one." But her voice trembled like she already knew what came next. More armored soldiers rushed forward, but they didn't attack. They paused, watching him, hesitating. Jason felt something strange then. Not fear, not anger, but recognition. The soldiers weren't sure if they should fight him or follow him. He raised the staff, and the room shook, symbols across the walls lighting up one by one. Then a deep voice echoed through the chamber, louder than before. It wasn't coming from the soldiers. It came from the space above, from the ceiling, the walls, the floor. "You cannot change what has already been written," the voice said. Jason looked around. Then I'll rewrite it. The air twisted as a new figure appeared, cloaked in darkness, hovering above the ground. Its body was tall and thin, its face hidden behind shifting lights. Kari gasped and whispered, "That's the original Watcher." Jason stared. "Is that what controlled you before?" Kari nodded slowly. "It gave the orders. It destroyed the others. It marked me." The Watcher raised one arm and sent a pulse of black energy toward Jason. The blast hit him square in the chest, but didn't knock him down. Instead, his body absorbed it, the light in his chest burning brighter. The Watcher's voice cracked. "Impossible." Jason stepped forward. "Staff in hand, you wanted control. But I'm not yours." He struck the ground, and a wave of light burst outward. The symbols on Kari's skin flared, and the Watcher's soldiers fell to their knees. Not in pain, but in freedom. Kari watched with wide eyes as the bonds on their minds broke one by one. Jason turned to her. "It's not just about me. It's about all of you." The Watcher let out a long, sharp sound, not a scream, not a voice, but a final command. But it was too late. Jason lifted the staff again, and with a final strike, the light swallowed the chamber whole. When the brightness faded, the Watcher was gone. The room was still. And for the first time, silent in peace, not fear, Jason fell to his knees. Exhausted, Kari rushed to him, holding his face in her hands. "You did it," she whispered. "It's over." Jason looked up at her, weak but smiling. "Not over. Just different now." Outside the sanctuary, the world felt cleaner. The trees didn't whisper warnings anymore. The air was calm. The remaining soldiers walked away without a word. Whatever held them before was gone. Kari and Jason stood at the edge of the cliff where it all began. She turned to him. "What will you do now?" He looked out across the forest, then up at the sky. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I know I'm not alone." She stepped closer, her fingers brushing his. "I was never supposed to stay," she said softly. "But now I don't want to leave." Jason nodded. "Then don't." The sun broke through the clouds, painting light across the trees. Jason closed his eyes, letting it wash over him. From a lost camper to the key of an ancient force, he had changed. But what mattered most was the girl beside him, who taught him how to stand when the world fell, and when night returned again. It didn't feel strange anymore. It felt like home.